The title of the sermon today is Unreasonable Godly Hospitality. And I'll discuss I'll try to remember to discuss the title a little bit later about the unreasonable part. But I want to tell, so obviously the message is about hospitality, and I wanted to mention some different things that my family, when I was young, with mom and dad, that we experienced from people's gracious hospitality to us. And then we'll discuss some other things. But did anybody here know the Braden family? I think his name was Bill Braden. Did he work in printing? Do you know?
No, not in printing.
Not printed.
What did he work in?
Maybe accounting, but I'm not sure.
Okay, maybe accounting. I don't remember, but okay, I've mentioned before here, I think that my dad was accepted to Ambassador College in 1955, and I was outside with him. We had a 100-acre farm. I was 3 years old, and Dad was using a torch, and something went wrong, and it blew up or something. Dad got burnt real bad. And I distinctly remember Mom coming out of the house with a yellow raincoat and knocked him on the ground and wrapped him up in that raincoat to put the fire out. So anyway, but Dad was supposed to go to AC out in Pasadena that fall, but he didn't get to go. He spent a month in the hospital. So, and Dad was looking forward to finding out about the church. So that was in 1955. So in 1958 or 9, we made a trip out to Pasadena from Indiana, central Indiana, where we lived. And we got out there. We didn't know anybody, and nobody knew us. And so we were on the campus there, and Dad ran into Mr. Braden. Was Bill his first name?
I think it was Bill.
Yeah, I think it was Bill Braden. And so he didn't know us, we didn't know him, and so Dad started talking to him and told him why we're there. And I always remember Dad saying that Mr. Braden looked him square in the eye before he did this, and then he invited us to stay at their house. And they had a 2-bedroom duplex. I think it was 2-bedroom. They had 2 little kids, and there were 5 of us. And, I don't think his wife knew anything about him inviting us, and so due to their hospitality, that may had a lot to do with the trajectory of our family with, my parents and me and my brothers, and also to the rest of our family. Because I don't know for sure if we would have started attending church if they hadn't been so hospitable, but they set an excellent example. And I'll get back to that story later. About 12 years after that, the Bradens were transferred to Big Sandy, and they lived here for a number of years. I'm not sure how long, but so we didn't see them too much because we attended the Longview Church, and I think they probably attended the college here. I'm not sure, but I'll get back to Mr. Braden later. Okay, and I've got a couple more examples of hospitality done to my family when I was a kid. One was, at that time in the 60s, the whole Indianapolis church would go to Chicago for the holy days. We'd keep all 7 days, just like at the feast. There'd be services every day. And does anybody here know the Efimov family? I think one of their sons lives in Dallas. I think he attends church over there in Dallas. But they lived in Chicago at the time. And so they did the same thing. They invited us in. We stayed with them for would have been more than the whole 7 days plus whatever fringe days on each end. And that was really, really nice and really kind of them. And obviously, it would have put them out because somebody would have given up some beds, and maybe the kids slept on the floor. I don't remember. Maybe we slept on the floor. Maybe us kids slept on the floor. But another example of godly hospitality. And then one more I'll mention is some of you probably know, I know J.D. Chalmers has been in the prayer request. Her husband was really sick, and then he died back here, I think about 2.5 months ago. She lives down in the Huntsville area, I think. But another year, when we went to Chicago, I was probably about 11 or 12 years old, and we stayed at their house. Their last name was Listen. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And we stayed with them during the spring holidays we were probably there for 8 or 9 days, somewhere around that. And so you all know Ray Hall, don't you? Real nice black fellow that I think he's spoken here different times. He's one of my newest friends, but I love Ray. But he knew I was going out of state to visit my kids and grandkids a couple of years ago, and he said, hey, I've got a friend of mine that's got cancer. I'd like you to go pray for her, if you would, to go visit her and pray for her. And I told him sure. So I did. Well, I planned to, and then I called Ray to get some more information one day, and he said, well, actually, I'm on the phone with her sister right now. Her sister lives in down by Huntsville, I think, yeah. And so he said she went to Chicago when she was a little girl. They lived in Chicago, and I said, well, ask her what was her last name. He said, Listen, and I said, ask her if they had goats when she was a little girl. And he asked her, and she said, yeah. And I said, tell her we stayed at their house when I was about 11 or 12 years old during the spring holidays. So it's a small world. And so when I went out to visit my kids and grandkids, I went to visit her sister. She was taking cancer treatment. She's doing pretty well from that now, I think. But then, and I stayed in contact with her and have been in contact with J.D. since her husband died about 2.5 months ago. But, okay, and then I'll tie up the story about Mr. Braden. So at the feast in 2016, my wife and I went to Oceanside, California for the feast. And, I met a number of people there. And after the service on the last, y'all hear the rain, the storm? I think I heard the thunder a while ago. You might want to say a prayer that we're protected. Anyway, so after the service on the last great day out in Oceanside, California, somebody I met during the feast came up to me and said, hey, Morris, I'd like you to come back here and meet somebody. He said he's sitting on the back row. He said he's blind. And so I went back there and I walked up there. And he said, this is Mr. Braden. And I said, I know you. And I said, we stayed at your house when I was about 7 years old. I said, you had a ski boat out in the parking lot that you lived in a duplex, had a ski boat out in the parking lot that you built yourself. He said, that's right. And so I sat down there and we talked for 20, 30 minutes. And he said, I wish you could come out. He lived by himself in a mobile home, and he had somebody that came and checked on him every day or two. And he said, I wish you could come out here and live with me and be my friend. And I said, well, I am your friend, but I'm married and I have kids and grandkids. I said, I can't come live with you. But that was just a real special 20, 30 minutes to be able to sit and visit with him. And he was, at that time, I think he was about 90, and that was 10 years ago. So I look forward to seeing some of these people in God's kingdom. So the point of that is it's the responsibility of all of us to be hospitable. And our being hospitable to other people can have a big impact on their lives. Let's turn to 1 Peter chapter 4, and we'll read verses 4 through 10. 1 Peter 4, 8 through 10. First Peter 4, 8 through 10, verse 8. And above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. As each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. We should all do all of these things. It's getting pretty dark out there. I can't, it looks like it's dark. There's a Danish proverb that has a lot of truth to it. It says, if there's room in the heart, there's room in the house. And when I was growing up in the church in Indianapolis, there was a common saying, if somebody needed a place to stay, is we have wall-to-wall floors. So that gets back to if there's room in the heart, there's room in the house. And it's not about, I'll tell you another story a little bit later, but a sad story, but some people talk about entertaining. I really don't like the use of that word in that way, but it's not our job to entertain. And when I think of entertaining, I think of trying to show off and flaunt what you have and what you're serving and all of that. It's about being hospitable, which is serving the others. So again, it all gets back to what's going on in our heart. And don't fall into the trap of thinking that, well, we can't have them over because their house is nicer than ours. Ours isn't as nice, or my food's not as good as what they fix, or whatever. So one story I've got is, anybody here remember Curtis and Melba Borman? The Wynn does. They were real close friends of ours, Linda's and mine, back in the 70s. And Curtis and Melba worked really hard and smart. And we were in our 20s, about 25, 26. And Curtis and I were the same age. And they worked really hard and successfully. And they worked long hours. They started buying fixer-upper houses in addition to their regular jobs and fixing up the houses. And they were able to build a really nice, not an average new house, but better than average new house back in, when would that have been? Well, that was in about 78, I think, 1978, I think. And once they got their new house built, they never got asked over to anybody else's house because everybody else thought, well, my house is not as nice as theirs, so they wouldn't want to come to my house. But it's not about that. And another example is, it's been about 20 years ago, Len and I invited a couple to our house for dinner. Most of y'all would probably know them. He died back several years ago. They were very successful, and they already had an absolutely wonderful home, and then they added on a four-story addition to their already wonderful home, so that might give you an idea. And they had, I think the garage had I think the house had an attached garage, but they also had about a 10-bay garage out away from the house a little bit that was full of all kinds of expensive exotic cars. The point is, the same thing, they came over to our house for dinner, and this is sad, but they told Lynn and I that in all the years they had lived there, which had been 20 or 25 years, I think, they said we could easily count on one hand the times we've been invited to somebody else's home. So we don't want to be that guy. It doesn't matter what we've got. If we've just got a campfire out here, we can pull up a log or a concrete block or something and say, hey, I've got some beans. You want to come have some beans with me? So we need to think in those terms. So hospitality is not about trying to impress somebody. It's about loving kindness and creating connections, which is the whole reason that God created us to have a family. And God is very hospitable to us, and we need to be hospitable to others. So hospitality is extending to strangers the kind of kindness that you normally would reserve for your family and your friends. And hospitality is a big part of God's very nature. When we express hospitality, we're actually expressing the loving kindness of God to others. Some of you here probably know Dave and Joy Kern that attend CGI in Tyler. I know Wynn does. Wynn knows everybody. But I love Dave and Joy Kern. And first time Lynn and I met them about 10 years ago, you know how sometimes you meet somebody and you just feel a natural attraction to them? That's the way it was with Lynn and I with Dave and Joy Kern. And I've said before that I like to talk about them when they're out of town because they can't do anything about it. So I think they're normally watching online. But they set an excellent example in hospitality. And numerous times after the potluck at CGI, after services, and then the potluck, which I usually stay until that's over. I stay until Larry Watkins kicks us all out. But and Dave and Joy Kern have invited me to their house a number of times just to have, a glass of wine or just to visit some, which is really nice. But they set an excellent example in that. Let's turn to Titus chapter 1, and we'll read verses 7 and 8. Titus chapter 1, verses 7 and 8. Verse 7, for a bishop must, and Dave Kern is a local elder, for a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled. I think of Dave and Joy Kern when I read that scripture. So when we go to church, we're going into the house of God. And God has invited us here into his house. He wants us to be in his family. Let's turn now to Romans chapter 12, and we'll read verses 9 through 13. Romans 12, verses 9 through 13. Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor, giving preference to one another, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. That's supposed to be us. That's our job. And then let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2. 1 Timothy 3, verse 2. I woke up with a sore on the side of my tongue this morning, so it's a little bit hard to talk. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach. And you can look up the word hospitable, which I've done, and it's in Strong's Concordance, it's word number 5382, and it means pretty much just what it says, what you would think it means, to be hospitable. So one good thing to do, to keep in mind, is to try to already have prepared food. If somebody shows up at church and you meet them and it seems like it'd be a good idea to invite them and be hospitable, maybe you can think ahead and have some things prepared that you can serve somebody on short notice, and it works out real well. I try to do that whenever I make like a pot of chili or big pot of soup. I usually make 4 or 5 gallons, and I freeze it or can it, and that way, when I have company, I can just heat it up or open up the jar and heat it up, and it works out pretty well. And chili is pretty flexible. You can have just a bowl of chili, or you can have put it over a baked potato, or I think Linda used to make enchiladas and put the chili in with the enchiladas, which was really good. So, it's good to think of things like that. Maybe, just some things that you can fix up or serve on the fly. And again, the objective is to be hospitable, not to try to impress somebody or entertain them. It's not about a gourmet meal, or it's about creating relationships. Lynn and I always loved to have people over. We loved having a house full of people, whether it was for dinners or anniversary parties, birthday parties, parties. We used to say that, like for the barn dance, that for the barn dance, we'd have the pre-party after we got all set up the day before. We'd have the pre-party, and then we'd have the party, which was the barn dance. Then after the barn dance was over on the cleanup day, we'd have the post-party. The real party was just an excuse to have the pre-party and the post-party. That's what I used to say, but it was always a lot of work, but it was also always very enjoyable to work together with people in the church, and then to be able to enjoy the fruits of it. And I might also mention that Linda and I, for years, tried to keep a campfire in the backyard ready to light. So, and then like maybe on Friday, we call around a number of people and say, hey, we're going to have a campfire in the backyard tonight. We're going to have a wiener roast. Would you like to come? And that was always very enjoyable and didn't take much effort at all. And I had planned to do that this winter. A couple of years ago, y'all may remember Carol Taylor. She's been here, I think, more than once with me. She's from Austin. She's up here right now. United's having the regional family weekend, which is why Kenny came up, and Carol, and then there's some others that'll be here. And I'm taking my smoker over there tomorrow to smoke a bunch of hamburgers and hot dogs. But anyway, it's been my plan to invite a bunch of people over sometime this winter to have a wiener roast in the backyard. But I've been really busy, and we're already halfway through February, so we'll see. A friend of mine from church down in Tyler, Rita, well, she's been up here before. She was there. Been about a year and a half ago, probably, and Carol and Ray Hall and several others were there. Just so enjoyable to sit around a campfire and just visit. And Rita really enjoyed that. I think that was probably maybe in December when we did that, about a year and a half ago, or would have been a year or 2 years ago. And so Rita told me, she said, Morris, I want you to have another campfire, and we'll roast hot dogs and stuff. I said, it's June. And I said, it's not near as much fun when it's hot. She's like, oh, that'll be good. So her and her sister and brother-in-law came up, and I think I built the fire, but it was too hot. We ended up going back in the house and fixing our hot dogs. But, think of what you can do like that, just something simple and on the fly, just to be able to get together and visit with people. So my question is, if I'm able to do this soon enough, how many would be interested in coming to my house, like on a Saturday night, and have wiener roast and marshmallows and, all right, I got some takers. So we'll see if I have time. Okay, so I've got one prop today. Does anybody know who Will Guidara is? This is his book. I ran across him on a podcast, I guess it was, back here a few months ago. And he's the one, I borrowed the title from his book, Unreasonable Hospitality. And he owned a restaurant that was voted best restaurant in the world. And that might seem kind of crazy because there's no telling how many restaurants in the whole world. But I watched several videos that he's been on, and And I bought his book. I'm bad about buying books because I know what's in it, and then I don't read them. I still need to read this. I've looked through it some, but I've got some notes here from his book. But, and my grandson, Ben, inspired by Charlie Kirk, he wants to grow up to be a good man. He's 17. And he actually attends, him and his sister attend the same high school that Erica Kirk graduated from. And Ben's getting a Turning Point chapter, Turning Point USA chapter started in their high school. But, so his birthday was in November, so I bought him and my other grandson this book, because it's, from what I've seen, and I know it's got a lot of really valuable information in it. But some of the highlights of the book is he owned this restaurant, and it was already named in the top 50 restaurants in the world. I think it's in New York City. And there was a group of foodies that flew from Europe to come to New York City and to go to the different top restaurants to experience it. And he happened to be I think they had about 30 chefs in the restaurant. I think it's a pretty good sized operation. And he happened to be at the table of this group of foodies from Europe, and he heard one of them comment that how much he enjoyed the trip. Their one regret was that they never got to try a New York City hot dog. And he didn't say a word. He left their table, went outside, and went running down the street to a street vendor, bought a hot dog, brought it back, took it to the kitchen, and told the chef, cut it up in 3 pieces, I think it was, and put it on plates, and they served it, put some condiments on it. And he served that, and that really impressed them that, it wasn't a gourmet meal. It was just a New York City hot dog bought from a street vendor. But the point was that he cared so much that he ran down the street and bought it, had it prepared with the condiments, and served it to them. That completed their trip. They'd flown all the way from Europe, and that was pretty cool. And then he learned from that experience. What they did was, in the restaurant, they created a new position called Dream Weaver, the one that weaves the dreams. And so all the personnel that worked there, which is quite a few people, they would keep their eyes out and their ears out for something special they could do for somebody. And he says, it's not one size fits all. It's one size fits one. So what would really make them happy? Well, let's do that for them. And he gave an example of a couple that was supposed to go on a trip to Jamaica, I think it was, and I don't know what happened, what went wrong, but they didn't get to go on their trip. So they sent their people to the lumberyard or wherever, and they bought a bunch of sand, bought a little kiddie pool, some beach lounger chairs, and they set up the room they were in like a beach resort. And that really left an impression. That would be pretty neat if you didn't get to go to Jamaica, but they cared enough to do that. And I'm trying to remember the details, but Jimmy Fallon, he's the host on the Tonight Show, isn't he? Okay, well, he heard that Will Guidara his restaurant had been named the best restaurant in the world. So then he just sent he sent Will Guidara an email or something, said, what next? Something on the moon? And so based on that, and then as it turned out, Jimmy Fallon had a reservation to come there, I don't know, a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks later, whatever it was. And so when he went there, they got through with the meal, and Will Guidara walked up to Jimmy Fallon's table and said, you're going to have to come up to the second floor for dessert. So they go to the elevator. They get on the elevator, and they had covered up all the buttons. And the one that had the 2 on it that goes to the second floor, they had a little sign on it that says launch. So they push the button and you get launched up to the second floor, and then they opened it up, and I think the servers had on spacesuits and had it all set up like a moon landing. But the thing was, the whole point is, when you're hospitable, find little things that you can do that would be really special to your guests. Doesn't have to be something big and elaborate. You don't have to set up a moon landing. But do things, his whole point is make it memorable, make them feel wanted and welcome. So I've got 12 points here that he pointed out. One, hospitality is an exchange of love, and it's a risk. And you don't know if you're going to be loved back or not, but, take the chance. And this is a really good one. Second one is, churches should be the most unreasonably hospitable places on earth. And that's true. When somebody comes to church, we should make them feel incredibly welcome. Good leaders create opportunities for connection. I've said before, I don't know of anything that survives this life other than relationships, our relationship with God and our relationships with one another, which gets back to the two great commandments, love God and love your neighbor. We want to make people feel seen and make them feel welcome and give them a sense of belonging. And we want to slow down. We all rush so many things to do, which I know that's the case in my life, and the number one guy responsible for that is this guy right here behind this tie. But slow down enough to listen to your guest and be present. And like I said a little earlier, in a hospitality, one size does not fit all. One size fits one. So tailor your hospitality specifically to your guest. Treat each guest as a unique individual. The important thing is how you make them feel, to feel wanted. Next to last one is take hospitality seriously. The last one is, but don't take yourself too seriously. And I've always got to give this caution. Anytime I speak about something like this is you don't want to enable people. And there's no shortage of people out there that would like to take advantage of you. So pray for discernment. Be like Mr. Braden was, I imagine he probably was praying about inviting us over too, but pray for discernment and don't welcome someone into your home that has evil intentions or bad intentions or selfish intentions. There's plenty of people that would love to come in and mooch off of you, and we've probably all heard of a number of cases like that. I know I have. And if you find yourself in that situation where you've been hospitable to somebody, you've invited them in, and then maybe to spend a couple of days, and then that days turned into weeks, that turned into months. If you find yourself in that situation, you need to tell them kindly but firmly, it's time for you to go. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, call me. I'll do it. I've had plenty of experience, especially with rental property. Another example of hospitality is in the Old Testament when Abraham saw the three angels coming down the road, and what did he do? He didn't just sit up there in the shade and think, well, I don't know if they're going to stop here. Hope they don't. Let's see if they do. No, he went out there and greeted them and invited them in, and he told Sarah, his wife, to kill the fatted calf, and she got busy and made flour, and I've got the details here somewhere. I read about how much flour she ground up, but it was like an enormous amount that you could make. Seemed like it was 100 loaves of bread or something like that. So she didn't scrimp like, well, this little cupcake will be enough, but be generous to the degree that you can. And it kind of reminds me of the widow who was it, Elijah? She had just a little bit of oil, and he said, make me a cake or whatever it was. And she said, "Oh, it's all I've got. Me and my son were going to eat it and then die." But he encouraged her to go ahead and make it anyway, and then that never ran out. So, if we take our resources and use them to bless others, God has all the resources in the world to replenish and resupply us. Let's turn to Romans chapter 12, and we'll read verses 12 and 13. Romans chapter 12, verse 12. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. And, I know, as we all get older, we're not able to do as much as we used to do. And I've been giving myself this little talk that maybe I need to cut back a little bit and make fewer commitments, because I've had, some issues the last, 5 years actually. But anyway, we all do, but my point is, as we get older, if we need to cut back, then do that if you need to, but cut back wisely. Don't just say I can't do anything, or even somebody in a nursing home, I know that can be really hard, but even in a nursing home, you can still be hospitable. And by the way, I think I failed to welcome those watching online, so welcome. But, if it's no more than inviting somebody else to come by for coffee or to have lunch with you or something like that. I know those can be really hard situations, but, if you're able to, that can be a huge blessing to you and the other person. One final scripture. Let's turn to 1 Peter chapter 4, and we'll read verses 7 through 11. 1 Peter 4, 7 through 11. But the end of all things is at The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be serious and watchful in your prayers, and above all things have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Verse 9, be hospitable to one another without grumbling. As each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God. If anyone ministers, let him do it as with the ability which God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belong the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. So let's be like God, our Father, and let's be generous. Let's be unreasonably hospitable.